Hi everyone, welcome to the Wandering DMs. I'm Paul.
And I'm Dan, and today on Wandering DMs, we're going to be talking about dreams and visions and prophecies, and whether those are things that you can use in the plotting of your D&D games, or maybe not, or maybe yes, or maybe not.
Sorry for the delay, everyone. We are having a little audio issue there, but hopefully it's all worked out.
Yeah.
But if you're seeing us and can't hear us, please do let us know in the chat.
Yes, or anything else that you want to bring up. So this shows a little bit of a curveball, right? So I think Paul was a little bit surprised when I brought this up. And part of my vision for this particular episode of Wandering DMs is that the day that we're doing this just happens to be the 400th anniversary of French mathematician, philosopher René Descartes locking himself in an overly hot room overnight, having a fever dream, and coming out the next morning believing that a vision had visited him, and he came out with "I think, therefore I am," and a strategy, an intellectual strategy that we now know as the scientific method. A little thing you may have heard of there.
So, Dan, in preparation for this, did you lock yourself into an overly hot room last night?
Yeah, I always do, Paul. I always do. That seriously was a point. I actually got up, and we have guests over for the weekend, and I actually got up and I heard in French my partner Isabel actually telling someone that when I sleep, I'm a nuclear reactor. I actually throw off a whole lot of heat, honestly, and that was actually a topic of conversation this morning. So yes, I did.
Excellent.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Descartes.
So when you brought this up, I was definitely stretching myself to try and think of an example. I can certainly say that in my past, I'm sure that I have used the sort of standard cliche of delivering information, background, or leads or whatever into the game via a dream or a vision or something like that.
Okay.
I don't think it's ever been mechanized, right? I think it's something maybe I've done because it fit the setting or whatnot. And I'm really struggling to think of a specific example, to be honest.
I think it's possibly difficult. I think that it's an interesting topic for the purpose that obviously visions and dreams and prophecies and fates are a standard part of mythology and legends and literature. And in some sense, it really cuts against the grain of D&D of the future is not mapped out yet. So a lot of these things of like a thing will happen in the future is really cutting against what D&D is as far as it's live, it's up to the players, anything that can happen, the dice are going to twist the future in ways that we don't expect.
Interesting.
And so I think this standard, mythological trope is really hard to fit into D&D because the dice could come up, later on and do something totally different than what you'd planned out in advance. So I think that it really is a nail that's hard to fit into that.
Yeah, certainly the foretelling aspect of it is tough. Okay, so I have a couple of more modern examples that I can think of that are kind of sort of somewhat related to this.
Right.
One is I immediately thought of any fans of Critical Role out there will recognize that the character Ford is a Warlock in 5th edition. I don't know if you've even encountered that class, Dan.
I've never. Good question. I've heard about it. I've heard about it. I've never been at a table with it.
It's very strange to me. I know certainly being used to more old school sources. Like I remember 3rd edition being like a sorcerer. Really, do we need another kind of magic user? Now with 5th edition we have Warlock, which actually kind of reminds me of the Dungeon Crawl Classics concept of a patron, which they integrated. I don't know if that's a call out to 5th edition or just a coincidence. I don't know. But basically the idea of a spellcasting character whose abilities come from some supernatural being that's not a god, it's not a divine, not a cleric, but just like a demon or the Great Old One or something like that. So in Critical Role, there's a character named Ford who is a warlock. His patron is called Ukatoa, and occasionally he receives dreams from Ukatoa.
Okay.
Yeah, even and it's interesting because the couple of times it happens, Matt Mercer will actually ask everyone but that player to leave the table, and he will describe the dream to his player. Yeah,
fascinating.
Now, usually those dreams I would say are not prophetic, right?
Okay.
They're more communication, right? It's more that this supernatural being reaching out and trying to guide and request. Right, it's more plot hook, I guess. More sort of oh, I need you to do this thing, not this will come to be.
Yep. Yeah. Does that actually have mechanics, or is that just purely Mercer making up what's good for his game?
That's all Mercer. That's all Mercer.
Okay.
Now, mechanics wise, here's an interesting fact. In my 5th edition game that I play every Sunday, I play a magic user, a wizard, sorry, in the modern parlance, whose specialty school is divination. And one of the abilities he has is every day he can cast portents. And the mechanic for that is I roll 2d20, and I keep those dice in front of me. And at some point during the game, before a die is rolled, I can say, I foresaw this, and substitute my previously rolled die for, say, this is the die roll, right?
Okay.
So I basically have a banked die roll, and I can say, I foresaw that you would fail miserably. Okay. I foresaw this was coming, and here's a 1.
See, it's interesting because that's the thing that those things turn into, right? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Is that you would like this I foresaw in your D&D game, and it kind of can't really you can't really foresee it.
Yeah.
So you wind up with something like, here's a bonus or here's a special roll you get, and we're gonna retroactively claim that you foresaw it.
No, it's pretty interesting in this case, and it's funny because I totally chose divination because of this ability. I think it's very amusing at the table. It's funny. Did
you say amusing or abusing?
Amusing. I enjoy it. I enjoy it quite a lot. I foresaw that you would.
Right.
I'm trying to think of an example, and actually, so the game I played a while ago, where we had special guest Joe Manganiello. All of our characters were I think injured or something was wrong with us. I think our halfling thief had thrown up some dust of disappearance, which turned out to be dust of sneezing. Everyone was incapacitated, and only Joe was standing, and he's surrounded by monsters, and he's making some kind of very important attack, and I go, I foresaw that you would save us. And I give him my banked 18.
Right.
And I don't know if that was necessarily a table-turning moment, but it was very satisfying.
That's great. I really like that. Yeah. Do you have 2 dice that you have? Is that what
you get 2. I think when I level it to at a certain level, I'll get 3 of them.
Gotcha.
I can use them each day. I basically the fiction is in the morning I cast the portents, right? I throw the bones, and so I roll these dice, and then I just leave them sitting in front of me. And I'm not allowed to. It's not an after the fact adjustment. I have to use the portent before the die roll happens. Yeah. I say, okay, before you make that roll, I foresaw X would happen. Here's your number.
Okay, that's a nice flavor on that. That there at least a couple seconds in advance. You're saying that that before the action is figured. Are you compelled? Like if you roll low, are you compelled to use those dice at some point?
I don't have to use them up.
Okay.
Right. I can sit on them and never use them. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's funny, it's the nice thing is there's certain types of rolls you can use them on. You can use them on your own rolls, and you can use them on rolls of people that you can see. Right. 'Cause you have to be able to see, because you have to be able to say, aha! I foresaw X was going to happen.
Okay.
But it's the funny thing is it's disappointing when I roll very middle of the road, right? If I get like a 10 and a 12, I'm like, right.
Yeah.
If I chuck my dice and I get a 1 and a 20, I'm really excited. Like, great.
Okay, great.
I can make someone fail something spectacularly, and I can make someone succeed something spectacularly. Great. That's
great. Great. Can you? Okay. So let's talk. So great. So we're talking spells.
Yeah.
Let's look at where the first attempts at D&D gaming, things like portents, right? So so we got a picture here. I got 3 spells I kind of want to look at.
Sure.
And there wasn't anything like that in original D&D. So the things that I'm looking at here show up first in first edition AD&D Player's Handbook, 1978. And so this first spell here is Augury. It's a clerical spell at 2nd level, and written by Gary Gygax. And the interesting thing here is it honestly really actually attempts to figure out whether a future action will be good or not sometime in the next day or half hour or something like that. So so 3 turns there, they figure it's 30 minutes, half an hour. So you have a percentage chance, like around 70%, you roll it, and if you succeed, the DM is supposed to tell you whether the proposed action is good or bad. There you go. So I feel like this is a bit of an oversight or like he wrote this and didn't realize that that's not possible. That's not possible because it hasn't happened yet, and you don't know how the dice are going to come. And as DM, I honestly don't know whether your action is going to be good or bad.
Right.
So the next year in the DM's guide, there's like this errata section of like, well, you ought to know whether it's dangerous or not. So your response to this spell can be those who survive will be fabulously wealthy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but that's all the time. That's everything all the time in D&D. That's just always the response to auguries. Those who survive will be fabulously wealthy and powerful.
Yeah.
So I feel like that was, I feel like that was a bit of an oversight that wasn't really going to work. And now things have transitioned to things like it's going to be, like I think in 3rd edition you get like a benefit to a die roll. In 5th edition now you have this spell that just replaces a die roll. Yeah. So wheel and woe.
I'm trying to remember use of this. I feel like we were always trying to specifically when casting it, pitch it as if I search in the deserts, will I find the princess? Right. Right. So sort of like a way of kind of coyly asking a yes or no question. Okay. I feel like that's the way I've always tried to use it. But yeah, you're right. Like this notion of like, will it go well or poorly is, I don't know. Who knows? I
mean, on the one hand, as DM acting, as Space Slem's pointing out, the terminology is wheel or woes. I kind of want to roll dice and then just go at my players and just yell at them, wheel, right, or whoa to you, right. And the DM's guide has all this flipper like, well, those who survive will be fabulously wealthy, and I'm like, not so. Anyway, so
William's asking if we are expected to fudge the dice. Gosh, I can't think of any case where any of the books actually recommend fudging the dice.
I would say no. Yeah. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that in the errata in the DM's guide. I'm guessing no.
Yeah.
Good question. That's a later mechanic. Later in maybe 2nd or 3rd edition, it turns into you can modify dice later, which is something that's actually workable. Yep. So the second example I have there is, and I guess that's small on the screen. There's a spell called Dream, and it shows up in the 1st edition supplement called Unearthed Arcana. It's a 5th level illusionist spell, and the very first thing there is this is sort of like an illusionist limited wish. The illusionist must recline on a couch for a day. Right, and then you basically get pretty much anything you want, like a limited wish. So you can heal people, or resuscitate people, or find a way in, or find a way out, or find the location of a treasure, or a whole bunch of stuff like that. And so, so illusionists in 1st edition are, they're a subclass, but they're a very different class from normal magic users. They don't have a lot of standard wizard spells like for limited wish. So here's like an illusion-y way of giving them the wish capability. And it's interesting because this was actually important in my 1st edition game because for high-level wizards making magic items, right? There's a rule in the DM's guide, and part of it is you need to use limited wish for any magic item. Part of it's you got to use limited wish to make it permanent. And so in pencil in my DM's guide, I have jotted in, or for illusionists, use Dream. Use this spell here.
Interesting.
Back in my campaign, that was the only way for illusionists to make magic items. So did I ever have any player that was an illusionist? I didn't. Did this spell ever get used? I never saw it get used. But theoretically, that was in the campaign, that was actually a really key spell for illusionists making magic items.
Fascinating. I'm really surprised here because last night when we were preparing for the show today, I brought up the Dream spell because I had recently read it in 5th edition, and I thought it was new. I had no idea it had any ancillary from the old editions. Clearly, no. Also, never had illusionists. Certainly, never had high-level illusionists that were going to cast this spell. And I think, as we'll see, the spell becomes radically different in later editions.
Yeah. We were looking at that together. So let's go to that right now. Okay. So flip two ahead.
Okay.
Go past this. Great. So Paul and I were investigating this last night, and he brought up the 5th edition Dream spell, and I was like, it does what? It does who? And then we basically started going down the list, and we were like, well, that's got to be new in 5th edition. That's crazy talk. And then we looked at it in third, and it was 3.5, and we were like, it's the same there. That's crazy. And then we looked at 3.0, and so this is the second edition version, and it's the biggest change to any D&D spell I've ever seen. It's the single most radical change I've ever seen, where they kept the name of the spell the same. And generally speaking, in second edition, David Zeb Cook's direction was just keep everything totally compatible with first edition, clean it up a bit. Most of the time, it's all just copy and paste, but he radically changed this spell. It doesn't do the limited wish thing. It can't make things heal or appear. The only thing it does is it sends a message to someone who's currently sleeping.
Yeah, very, very interesting, right? It becomes a communication spell.
Yeah.
I noticed also that our second edition version has a reverse called Nightmare that's maintained up through 5th edition. It's not called a reverse anymore. It's just, you can use it to kind of instead haunt someone and have them give them terrible visions, and they take some damage. And they also, they fail to long rest, so they won't get any of their stuff back. It's a weird spell. And the funny thing is, I remember reading it in 5th edition, and I thought this was evidence of one of the things I like about 5th edition, or one of the things that I didn't like about 3.5, was this feeling that spells like this that are clearly more intended for sort of plot reasons rather than purely tactical battle reasons had been removed. So I was very surprised to actually see that this spell pretty much exists this way in 3rd edition. That it's communication. It's sending someone nightmares. It's I can't come up with a generic reason why this spell might be good, or why I would want to use a spell. I feel very certain if I had access to this spell in a campaign, there would come up some situation where I'd be like, sweet, I'm using Dream. And I'd come up with some clever way to use it, but it would be so contingent on the content of the campaign. Right.
It's interesting, and so we were both just super surprised because me mostly focused on original D&D first edition. Once you get to second edition, I tend not to be a little sketchier in my knowledge, and so I had no idea that this was an effect in games after first edition. Was super surprised this was there. Had no knowledge of this until just last night. And I agree, and I would say, Paul, that so this is still 5th level, I think, and I feel that when 3rd edition wiped out a bunch of out of combat effects, they were a lot more meticulous at lower levels. So I think that like 1st, 2nd, 3rd level stuff that gets used all the time, they were more meticulous about nailing that stuff. And then the higher level spells, maybe they didn't quite do the same editing job on.
I can see that. I can see that. Certainly I can say in my own 5th edition game that I'm playing now, we're just hitting like 9th level. And as I'm looking at the higher level spells and trying to figure out what's my wizard going to learn, they get pretty weird. The high level spells get weird. And you're like, how am I going to use this? I don't know.
Yes.
Probably not in the combat.
Right, and you got to admit that no matter what happens, no matter how much time goes by, the higher level ones are going to be less play tested than the lower level ones. And that's always been the case. And I think that always will be the case. Okay. So there tends to be some wonky stuff there.
Before we move
the funny thing about this,
go on.
I kind of like this. The funny thing is not having known it, I kind of like this. And I'll say that if there does have to be in your fantasy world some kind of long distance because this doesn't have any range limit on it, some kind of long distance communication method, I would much rather have this than like a magic rock that works like a cell phone, which some people have in their games.
Sure.
So not having heard about this, I kind of like this as the way to do long distance communication if you must have that.
Yeah. It's interesting also because 5th edition has a sending spell, which is a 3rd level spell where I can send a message. I'm a limited number of words I can use, but I just magic send a message to someone.
Okay.
And gosh, why in 5th edition
why do we
am I going to spend a 5th level spell using the dream spell when I can spend a 3rd level one using sending? I don't know. Weird.
See, and I like this. I like this better than sending.
Yeah,
honestly.
Me too.
And there's also some spells like druids also have some spells whereby you can get a little creature like a squirrel or a bird, and have them, go to somebody and then, speak a message to them. And I like that. That's nicely in flavor and stuff like that.
Yep. I totally agree.
But things that are like, oh, magic walkie-talkie or whatever. See, I'm showing my age there. Magic cell phone. It tends to be, it's a little lazy design for my purposes. I see why someone does it, but it's like you can be a little bit more creative about that.
So before we move on from Dream, though, one important tangent I want to go down, which is Elves. So is second edition call out Elves? I'm sorry, I'm scanning the text real quick. Certainly the 5th edition rules of the spell specifically call out that you cannot target Elves with it because they don't sleep.
So we were debating. So last night we were debating about like when in the edition time frame did they come up with this Elves don't sleep bit? And I recall that in first edition there's a special defense Elves have against 2 spells, and those 2 spells are Charm Person and Sleep.
Yep.
The standard first level wizard go-to spells, and there's this new rule in first edition. Listen to what I just said. That all Elves have 90% resistance to those spells, which makes them even more uber and basically impossible to defeat by first level wizards.
Yep.
And so at some point, right, I don't think it's in second edition, but at some point somebody expanded that and said generally speaking, Elves don't sleep. Period. Yeah. The end.
Certainly, that was it's in third edition, right? When you get into the more minute, right? Like the older editions, I feel like when they talk about spells, it's spells per day, and we don't really worry about what that means in regards to like what if I stay up all day, or when exactly can I get my spells back. And third edition started to codify it more, and it was like, all right, you got to sleep. You got to sleep for 8 hours, right? And then for some reason you get this bit about like, but Elves enter this weird trance that's not sleeping, and it's half the duration. Like, were they just trying to like emphasize that Elves are magical and they're better at magic, so they can get their spells back faster?
I feel that was just slightly lazy design of they have resistance to sleep spells, so they don't actually sleep ever.
I don't know
I don't think it was well justified. So, I mean, the whole you got to sleep to get spells back, that's in first edition. And in fact, they have actually way more technical, like for this spell, you got to sleep 4 hours, but for this spell, you got to sleep 6 hours. It's like even more technical in first edition.
Jeez.
So I don't know. I mean, if somebody knows when the whole we couldn't track down exactly. It's in third edition. I don't think it's in second. There might be some like 2.5 supplement on Elves where that shows up for the first time. I feel like someone might tell us. But
I'm super curious if it has any kind of basis in literature, or like where the heck did this idea come from? Like, is it like you mentioned, just an expansion of this notion that they're immune to sleep? Where did that even come from? Why did Gygax decide that Elves should be immune to sleep spells?
I think that was just like, Elves are just better in first edition. Like, there's a legitimate complaint in first edition that just Elves are better at everything. They're better at wearing armor and spells, and they have higher movement, and they can hide. And now we're also just going to make them basically immune to first level attack spells.
Yeah, didn't they also have like they're better at using longbows and longswords, which are like clearly the 2 best weapons in the whole weapon list.
Yep.
So
and they get a whole big giant list of free languages too.
Yeah,
right. So
weird.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, that's that. I wanted to go down that tangent because I find that super weird, and I feel like if I was paying attention and starting a new campaign, I would quickly write into my house rules list: Elves sleep. End of story.
Yeah. Maybe they sleep more. You know what? If they live hundreds of years like a dragon, maybe
they're like cats.
Maybe once a year they have to sleep for a whole week or a whole month, or every 10 years they got to sleep for a whole year. I feel like Elves should be sleeping more, actually.
Just real quick for our viewers. We were talking the other night about our birthday live play where you guys decided to all play Elves, and I was kicking myself for not coming up with this idea back then, which is if you have a party of all Elves, I would be very tempted to idly accelerate the timeline and just sort of toss things in occasionally. Oh, you return to town and everyone's much older because you're Elves and you don't really notice, and like what feels like a month to us is really like 5 years. And I think that would be super fun to play with. So if you ever find yourself DMing a group of all Elves, I recommend give that a try.
And you could use the reverse sleeping thing like that. Of like, okay, so you go for a nap, and then it's next fall or whatever, right? And it's like a year goes by, and your tab is like higher than you expected.
You're an elf. You live hundreds of years. Who cares?
Exactly. So Space Lem on the elf thing, Space Lem is saying it could be worse. It could be like elves in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition. So are elves also uber in Warhammer Fantasy, Paul? Is that?
I mean, certainly their stats are better.
Yeah.
Gosh, I've not played First Edition in forever, so I don't remember how much more uber they are.
I will say it sounds like Chainmail. So if you go back to Chainmail, right, by Gygax, I mean, elves have extra movement. They are assumed to have magic weapons. They can all turn invisible at will. And over the years, that stuff got reinterpreted or dialed down to, well, they're not invisible, but they have green cloaks and they can hide in the woods and stuff like that. And they don't all have extra mobility, but if they have Elven Chain, then they do.
Right.
So they both come from Tokine, obviously.
Yeah.
So that's where
I mean, you really get into this war here where like, on the one hand, we have these literary precedents of elves are just better than humans. They're more rare, right? So it's strange to see one. It's unusual, but they're amazing. And then the flip side of that is game balance, right? I want all my players to be on equal footing.
Yep.
Right, and then I feel like that's a contention we see throughout editions in various ways, right? There's like, isn't there a class in Unearthed Arcana that like first level is really like fourth level? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So it could be probably Cavaliers. So Cavaliers have a -2, -1, 0 level. You come in possibly at first. You have a whole bunch extra hit dice than normal people, and they're the only class where their ability scores just naturally go up every level.
Yeah.
So Unearthed Arcana has a bunch of power creep in it, and then you also have the Barbarians that have a higher hit die than anybody else ever saw.
I remember my second edition game when I was in high school, and Drow of the Underdark came out, and suddenly they're trying to scale Drow to work with players, and like, by the book monster manual, all the abilities that Drow have, kind of too much for a first level character. Right. And then you end up with all these weird rules of like, well, they don't develop that ability until later in life. So until you don't get this one until you reach 4th level. You don't get this one until you reach 6th level. And
Yep. Okay. It's tough. That's the commercial end of this hobby. And like as one example, so it's interesting because like in my games, like I'm trying to cut down on classes, right? I'm carving classes out, so I only have 3 in my game. But the commercial angle is it's better to have more and more stuff for the the consumer to have available, and it's honestly this tension about the commercialism versus the art.
All right, so let's get back to visions and prophecy and dreams.
Right. Let me look at the let me go back to the Gaius spell actually. So, because I was looking at these in increasing order. So this is so here's Gaius. I'm looking at the first edition text of it. It's pretty similar to the original D&D text, and so this actually of the spells, this was the only one in OD&D. So I feel like on the issue of like fate being determined in advance, Gaius goes in this direction. I kind of like it. You hit someone with it. There's supposed to be no saving throw, and you're just compelled to do a thing. And if you don't do it, you die. And this has a mythological legacy to it. It comes from Celtic Irish myth on Gaius's, and it does. Your fate is sealed. You have a Gaius. There's nothing you can do. Dispel magic won't remove it. Remove curse won't remove it. There's nothing you can do to remove it. Your fate is sealed. You've got to go do this thing. And so this is actually the only way that you can sort of have fate step into your D&D game. This has been super important in my game because it basically drove all the action for the last year and a half in my campaign, actually, of you've got to go get this particular item. And as a result, the whole party was compelled to do that. They made a deal. I didn't just hit them and say, go do this. They actually made a deal with a high-level wizard of we want X. I'll give you X if you accept this Gaius.
Interesting.
He
Interesting.
accepted it, so I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
I don't think I would want to just hit you with something for a year and a half you didn't agree to.
Yeah, I mean, certainly my experience with Gaius is more on that, like, now I'm constantly trying to think of ways around it, ways to get out of it.
Right.
Although I guess that's also very traditional, right? That's very Cudgel the Clever,
Yep.
right?
Yep, you're right. Good point.
Yeah.
Good point. So I had a really good player that accepted that, and that was finally actually just lifted 1 week ago. So now I don't know where the campaign's going. I think he was very happy to finally have it lifted, because I think they were like, we thought this was going to be a side quest, and it's been a year and a half of going into this horrible, horrible place. But they finally succeeded. So I kind of like that spell, and it's been important in my campaign. Okay. Again, in original D&D, 6th level was the highest spell, so this was basically the most powerful spell in the game.
And now this is a magic user spell?
It is.
That's interesting. So I was kind of anticipating, as we started looking at these, especially when you started with Augury, that I was like, oh, I bet most of these spells are going to be cleric spells. Because my expectation would be anytime you're getting into sort of fortune telling or visions, that usually we see them as divinely inspired.
That seems fairish. There is a parallel spell called Quest.
Yep.
On the cleric list that basically sort of does a similar thing. And then in 3rd edition, they smashed them together. So if you look in 3rd edition, there's a spell called Gaius/Quest.
Yeah, it's funny. So my question was going to be to you of like, so do you see this less because you've cut clerics out of your campaign? Or do you think
it's interesting. It's interesting. I think that I would phrase it, so short story, yes. The phrasing I would use is, I cut clerics because I want to philosophically see less of that stuff, among other reasons. So, so I feel like philosophically my game world is random and scary and no one's in charge. And so getting rid of clerics and shaving that stuff out of the campaign was part of the intent.
Yeah.
I would say.
So as we were talking about this, the thing that came to mind for me, the example, my actually favorite fantasy example of a god speaking to a mortal in sort of pulp fantasy settings that I would love to bring into my D&D game is actually from the book The Goblin Tower by Elsbreg de Camp.
Okay.
Basically, you have the hero Jorian. Lost in the jungle, trying to escape from pursuers, stumbles upon a little idol, a little stone idol in a sort of lost. He's like in a overgrown, decomposing ruin of an ancient civilization that's long gone. And he realizes that it's a little idol to some kind of forgotten god.
Okay.
And he goes to sleep, and the god visits him in his dreams. And basically, the god is like, I have 0 worshippers. I'm completely forgotten. I would love to have worshippers again. How about you worship me and I'll help you out? And Jorian's like, sure, that sounds great. But the problem is, the god is so forgotten and diminished and whatnot. It has very little power. And more often than not, like, Jorian will start asking, I'm being pursued through this jungle. What can you tell me about my pursuers? And the god says something like, oh, well, gosh, I guess I've kept you asleep for far too long because they're right on your tail and they're about to get you. And it's basically that. Like, you have this very funny character that comes and talks to him in his dreams, who is kind of omnipotent, but like just often forgets to do things, right? Like you have to ask him, hey, am I about to be killed? Oh yeah, actually you are about to be killed. Maybe you want to do something about that. Maybe stop sleeping.
Okay, so I'm having a vision right now.
Yeah.
And I have not read this book, and I have not read this particular story. I've played this, however. Oh. So my character in Max, I've totally gone through this myself.
Yeah.
With the character in Max's DCC campaign, because I think so either Max introduced this or that thing is in Stonehell. So we were running Stonehell for a while, and like around the 2nd or 3rd level, my character, who's a hobbit sorcerer, gets an idol, and it's an old forgotten idol of a frog god who's exactly in this situation. and then I get like partially possessed by the frog god. And once a day, I get some kind of whacked out information like we have to go kill the mosquito queen or something like that, right? And it's always disturbing and it's rarely helpful. And so I would actually tend to forget about it from time to time, and then all of a sudden, oh yeah, the frog god's talking to you now. I'm like, oh god, right here, this thing is again.
See, I love that stuff. I think that's super fun. And so I really like to see that in gods in a fantasy campaign. I want to see like that there are many gods and they don't even know who all they are, right? Like very kind of Fritz Leiber-esque, right? Like sort of like, that the gods are kindly machinating against each other and they're really like very, very fallible. And the funny thing is, I feel like role-playing games are towing the water with this, but on the other side of the fence, right? Rather than muddy the waters of clerics, they're introducing it to wizards, right? So again, to go back to it, you have DCC patrons, you have warlocks in 5th edition. Like let's have some some people who have powers that are given to them by supernatural beings who are weird and unknown and unreliable.
See, for me, I wish, right, and I could be, this could be a very unpopular opinion. But for campaign building purposes, I want one or the other. Like I want some kind of cohesive, view of the cosmos of either there are, sky deities controlling everything, looking down from above, watching out for people, or alien demons from another dimension tampering with space and time. And I can deal with one or the other, but when I have both being mishmashed, which I understand D&D is a big goulash, when I have both being mishmashed, I'm less interested in the campaign world. So I would, I'm happy to shave off clerics and then have a whole bunch of, demons giving you your wizard powers. That I'm pretty good with.
I mean, couldn't you just though have clerics and interpret them as weird demons who,
I'm like, well, okay. So do the clerics know that? I'm like, I don't.
No. Yes, maybe. I don't know, but certainly when I was running BX, when I first did my BX campaign, I had a player who played a paladin. We were using the Brave Halfling. I think we were playing Labyrinth Lord at that time, so we used the Brave Halfling Paladin class. And we interpreted. He was going for a very kind of Catholic view of the church, there's a pope, and so we invented a god or a religion for his character that basically believed in monotheism and was like, nope, my god's the only god, and all of these other gods that all you people worship are either just aspects of my god and you're worshiping them wrong, or they're demons trying to fool you. And I don't know, I enjoyed the nebulousness about could that be right? Could it be true?
Yeah.
Probably not. Everyone in the religion's probably deluding themselves.
Yeah.
I like the gray area.
Yeah, that's funny, and I can see playing with it. I'm gonna have to think about why that's not 100% hitting me the right way. I'm gonna have to come back with a better thesis on that. I feel I kind of want the whatever the cosmic architecture is to be directly dealt with by the players. I feel like if there is a cosmic architecture, I kind of want that to be part of the game, and I kind of don't want the players to have one view and the DM have a different view of what the world is like. That's my first stab at it.
Okay. So,
let me just point out. So Known Blob a couple minutes ago said, "I wonder if the elf trance thing leaked in from Forgotten Realms," and I feel like that could be it. Actually, I think there was some side product that did leak it into 3rd edition at some point. So I feel like that's a good theory.
I'll have to go dig up my old Forgotten Realms box set from back in the day. See what that has to say about it.
That's it. So you want to talk about the BX module series that I had a photo there for?
Sure.
So I feel like an interesting case of this is, so you have Frank Mentzer's actually Basic Expert Companion Masters Immortal set, or BECMI as some people call it. So here is the companion module number 1, which is called Test the Warlords by Doug Niles, and it is, if someone wanted to, you could really point to this as a socially regressive idea, because you're imperialists. and you are going at a high level. You're going into a supposedly empty territory, and you're carving a giant empire out of it. And one of the things they tried to do here is they tried to work in, and this series went for 8 modules, and then there's like 6 modules at the next higher level called Masters, and they tried to work in recurring characters called in this part of the world called the Crones of Christic. And the Crones of Christic are kind of trying to be Shakespearean, high-level witches, and they communicate to you all the time through dreams and visions and mirrors, with puzzles and riddles and glimpses of the future and things like that. And so, like, actually, the next image is the Jeff Easley picture of them. So here's the Crones of Christic. And so this is supposed to be a long-running piece of that campaign. They use them in at least 4 different modules, actually, which I think is unusual. So you get this in Doug Niles' CM1. They show up in, CM3, Saber River. They show up in, M2, so Master's level, which is like about 30th level by Skip Williams. And then they also show up in M5, Talons of Night by Janelle Jaquays, also uses them. And so they keep showing up over and over again with these dream riddle puzzles. And then the funny thing is, so in this first module here, you get a couple teasers. They show up in a mirror here. And then you have to go quest to find their remote mountain fortress, climb the mountain. And then there's just a big fight. and it just turns out they're 23rd level clerics, right? Okay. And they're wearing plate mail, and they have maces, and they have a bunch of high-level spells, and you just have a big, giant fight between you and these 3 23rd level clerics, one of each alignment.
Yeah, okay.
You got to kill 1 or 2 of them, and then they go, "Great, good job. We're impressed. You've earned our respect. We raised the people who are dead, and now you have more information than you had before." So it's kind of I can see why, Doug Niles is someone that I enormously respect for his work on Star Frontiers and also Battle System, his wargaming stuff, really great. And his adventure writing, sometimes I'm hot and cold on. And I feel like we tried to have this supernatural forces that are quasi-divine, right? You're not supposed to be able to wipe them out, and they're supposed to be around forever. And then it's just like, but we're just going to have a fight with some clerics. It's kind of works halfway well.
I feel like this feels to me very similar to the old problem of it's one of the original supplements, right, that starts to stat out some of the gods, right?
Deities and demigods very early on, 1 or 2 years after original D&D?
I was actually thinking one of the original OD&D supplements, right? Isn't there a supplement that starts to include stats?
Right.
Anyway,
there it's called Gods, Demigods, and Heroes is what it's called.
Anyway, and the sort of complaint, right, of like the constant escalating of power problem in D&D that I feel like maybe I heard Tim Cass talk about this once, that sort of the problem was they put out these stats thinking like these are the gods, they're all powerful, you should never face them because they'll just crush you. But then player levels started advancing to the point of like players went out and killed them. Like, oh, we killed Thor, woohoo, we win.
Well, the funny thing is, so Kask is the editor on that book, right? So Kask is actually the editor. So it's written by Kuntz and somebody else. And so Kask is the editor, and he has the foreword, and that's what he says in the foreword to that book of like, well, here we've finally presented the gods clearly. And it's kind of a reverse argument. It's like, clearly, you're not supposed to defeat them, and therefore, if you have a character high level enough to defeat them, you're clearly breaking the rules. Don't have that character. That's his claim there. And then, of course, ever after, of course, you're right, that didn't actually happen, and now he's been bemoaning ever since the fact that didn't work that way, and there continues to be power creep everywhere.
I feel like I have the same problem with these modules that were written, to be honest, the whole latter half of the Beckme line, right? When we're getting into 20th, 30th level type stuff, I kind of I start to lose interest, to be honest. I know that there's, my personal favorite was always BX, and BX ends at 14th level, which I think is perfectly reasonable. I even don't mind OD&D ending at 10th level. I think great.
Yeah.
That's an excellent ceiling, and I don't need anything above that. Because I just feel like you end up kind of just constantly chasing the bigger thing, and it just blows out the fiction to this scale that's just ridiculous.
Right, and admittedly the powers at those levels are not enormously well play tested. So you're gonna run into a bunch of wonky things, and even when I was playing BX at 12th level, they're basically superheroes. They can all fly, they can all turn invisible. So every single encounter was just fly directly down to the boss's building invisibly and just crush him, which is kind of interesting, but maybe not exactly what you want out of your fantasy game. Yeah. I will say that if you haven't read them, I mean the higher level modules for the Beckme line, they run warm and cold, but there are some interesting novel, creative things there. There's also a lot of cruft, but in that line, I feel like there was a freedom to do whatever the hell you wanted because TSR wasn't really looking at it too closely. So there's some real garbage and there's some real clever stuff. And I will say that Jaquays' Talons of Night is a brilliant module. It's a brilliant, high-level, interesting module. And again, Jaquays is one of my favorite designers. So creative. Also does the artwork. Double or triple threat or whatever you want to count it at. And I really like the Talons of Night module. I wish I could run that sometime. But it is like 30th level, so...
Yeah. So I'm reminded of one kind of funny anecdote. When I first started going to Total Con, which has got to be, I don't know, a decade ago at this point. I don't remember how long ago. It was a long time ago. When I first started going to Total Con, Tim Kask and Frank Menser were going to that convention, and I was like, great, I'm going to play games with them. And I played a game run by Frank Menser that was like 10 or 12 people at the table, and we're all playing level 15, 16 characters, AD&D First Edition. Yeah. And to go, I actually don't remember it super well, but fortunately I was keeping my blog at this time. So I was recently rereading that blog post, and I kind of had a terrible time at that game. And I even to the point of it was my first time ever visiting Total Con, and I had done it on a whim. I just showed up and I can get a hotel room for the night. Great. And I contemplated just going home the next morning. And I was like, well, let me try another game. And I actually sat down to another game, also run by Frank Menser, which was Palace of the Vampire Queen. So I was running Palace of the Vampire Queen. Yeah. And we played like first and second level characters. And again, big table, 12 or 15 people or something, because that's what he was doing at the time. And it was amazing. It was great. I had a wonderful time. And so my blog post is kind of funny because it talks about this I nearly ruined the whole thing. I nearly missed out on this great experience because the first one was kind of blah. And I feel like it was kind of blah because of the power level.
That is super interesting. Same DM, obviously, within 24 hours, same context. And just, there are times when I'm like, I'm going to figure out how to fix high-level D&D, and I'm going to test it and figure out how to make it work. And then a story like this is like, maybe we should, maybe the honest truth is it's really anchored around 4th level, plus or minus a couple levels. And that's where it works. That is where it works well. I think that's a great anecdote, actually. I remember when I went to Gen Con the one time, my worst game was the first game of the weekend. And I was also like, this is terrible. And the games got better throughout the weekend, so I've had a similar kind of experience.
I mean, even with my own convention games, I'm constantly trying to boil it down and be like, is this one? I made this one mistake. This is the reason this game went well, and this is the reason this game didn't go well. Yeah. And the fact is, there's just so many variables that it's probably foolish to try and actually measure what makes a successful convention game and what doesn't.
Yeah, that's a great point. I got 2 anecdotes about Frank Menser about high level play.
Yeah.
And so one is, he wrote the culmination of that Beckme line is this Immortals set, whereby you finally actually become gods.
Yep.
And when I was a teenager, I got that as a gift, and it's the only D&D anything I returned to the store. And it's batshit out of its mind, just off the wall. Nuts. And I still remember, he's got this ability score table that extends the 3 to 18 up to 100, and it's just a bunch. The numbers are just nonsense. It's just crazy. This is the craziest nonsense, irrational chart I've ever seen in my life. And then the modules are kind of half. Modules for it are kind of half comedy, And so that's actually my least favorite supplement for high level stuff. And Frank tried to do a good job, and maybe it's just unworkable. But the Immortal set is truly bonkers. Second thing is, recently I saw someone asking him on the Facebook D&D group different rules for beholders, right? Can the eyes all shoot at once? Do they interrupt the anti-magic? What about beholders? And so Menser generously answered a whole bunch of stuff, and he says, I run high-level games, so I run a whole lot of beholders. Like, I'm very experienced. I'm probably the world's expert in running beholders in games because I have lots of beholders, blah, blah, blah. And then the last thing he said is, if a beholder ever talks, I assume that it talks in Tim Kask's voice.
That's great.
Yeah. All beholders are supposed to talk like Tim Kask. That's canon. Yeah. So he runs a lot of high level stuff, and he still thinks about it, and that's his. So he tries.
Okay.
Yeah, people love Frank Menser running games. He's everybody. Usually people come away saying he's great.
I've played some wonderful games with him, and don't get me wrong. I do not mean to bash him at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm just not a fan of the high level stuff. I don't know. I mean, and to some degree, it kind of just comes down to taste, right? Like, some people love epic settings, and me, I want like gritty, screw each other over, barely survive. Yeah. That's what I'm looking for.
To bring it back to the Visions Prophecies thing, I will say that what Doug Niles and Skip Williams and Jaquays try to do with those high level modules with the Crones, kind of works. It kind of works because you're doing this campaign kingdom building, right? And so one of the things that they can do with the dreams is they can drop in, here's a place, right? Here's the location of a magical artifact that you need to go get. Or they can do a year from today, the foreign kingdom invades your country with a fleet of dragon ships or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so on that kind of outdoorsy campaign level where the DM actually might know events, where you've got the whole idea of events happening, right? You can commit to the horrible event happening a year from now. Whereas on a smaller scale, if you're doing like dungeon crawling type stuff, what happens in the next room? I don't know, right? I don't know. You might get surprised. You might trigger the trap. You might not trigger the trap. And so, like, maybe for lower level dungeon delving stuff, that idea of prophecy or foresight doesn't work quite so well.
I think I would fall back into a mechanic similar to the one that we see in 5th edition around portents, right? Yeah. Right. Give the players the ability to interpret foretelling at the last possible minute. And that I think is going to give you a satisfying feeling of like, oh yeah, it was foretold, but like we didn't remember it was foretold until it happened.
Yeah, it's legitimate. It's workable. It's fun. It's better than the 1st edition augury attempt where the DM is going to tell you what's going to happen before it happens. That was just a mistake. Yeah. So I think pretty quickly they came to mechanics like that, which are at least legitimate and actually workable. So that's an improvement. But to my taste, you're kind of cutting against D&D with all that stuff. It's but what's happening at the table with the dice is yet unknown. I suppose we should make another show where we have a philosophical discussion about whether free will exists and whether dice are actually randomizers or whether it's actually fixed in space-time or not. I have had an argument with that about somebody before. And does randomness exist, or is it multiple worlds impinging on each other? Which one is more dogmatic than the other?
I feel like I need to make a will save.
Kabam!
All right. Well, that's. Do you have anything else about visions or prophecy?
I think that's it. I think it's kind of difficult. I can see why people want to do that, and I think it's an interesting example in those BECMI modules of trying to do that. But it's a little anti D&D-esque to me.
Yeah, I agree.
Even though I like the Gaius spell a lot.
Yeah, but again, I don't think that's really a foretelling, right? It's
Right.
I guess, yeah, you have that little bit of inkling of like, you are fated to do this, and if
Right.
you don't,
Right.
you're gonna die.
Right. Exactly. Right.
But it
So
doesn't say
it's
you
a fate
can't,
and a doom.
right? Yeah.
Totally.
Okay.
Totally.
Well, very interesting. If you have any thoughts, dear viewers, about foretellings or prophecy or visions or dreams, or how you've seen them used in your campaigns, or the ways you'd like to see them used in your campaigns, please leave some comments for us here in this video. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us your thoughts, and we will be happy to dissect them.
Yes, please do that. Remember that you can. Should I talk about, Paul? Should I talk about when we're going on break?
Absolutely, yes. Please
Yes,
tell us all
great.
about break.
So remember, everybody, that our last show of the season is going to be December 8th. We're going to have a little break over the holidays. And then in the new year, we will have season 2 of Wandering DMs with new guests and new places that we're going to and new topics and a whole bunch of, hopefully, a whole bunch of wanderings around the globe, hopefully, too.
And while we're on break, we will be releasing some special exclusive to our patron content on patreon.com. So if you can't bear the idea of being a couple of weeks without us telling you all about our thoughts about D&D, consider checking out our Patreon, patreon.com/wanderingdms, and you will get access to that exclusive content over the break.
Yep, and we were recording some of that last night, very late last night. So we've got about half of that in the can at this point. So we're looking forward to our patrons being able to see that. If you and what that is specifically is it's a DM's commentary on our live stream game from this past July when we were playing through Dyson's Delve. So you're going to get back scenes, notes from Paul and what he was thinking and what we as players were thinking, and so that's. So if you do want to see that, please join us at patreon.com/wandering.
Yeah, I was surprised at how many little insights I actually had about various scenes and things that were a surprise to you. So.
And a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't know about, so that was revealing. And it's interesting because we didn't get to do that when we were playing. So now I get the whole like after story reveals. Yeah. Which is like, that was much more dangerous than I thought that was.
Fun stuff. Also, I should mention that we are going to be at PAX Unplugged in early December. So we'll be there. We'll probably be streaming from on-site. I have no experience with PAX Unplugged, so it's going to be all surprise to me. So hopefully we'll have some interesting reactions. And if you're going to be there, take a look for us and come say hi.
Yeah, absolutely. We would enjoy seeing you, and maybe you can show us the ropes at PAX Unplugged because we are going to be newbies there, which is pretty good. So remember that you can like and follow and subscribe to us on YouTube and Twitter and Twitch by the handle Wandering DMs.
Our discussions are available as audio-only podcasts on all the places where podcasts can be found. If you're listening to this on Google Play or iTunes or any place that serves podcasts, please consider rating and reviewing us. Also, you can find those podcasts on our own website at wanderingdms.com.
Thanks again to our patrons who support this show. And if you'd like to join them, please visit at patreon.com/wanderingdms. Remember, we are live every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, so please join us next week for another thought-provoking discussion.
We'll see you then.